Alabama, 1943. The sun beat down on the red clay airstrip as David Carter adjusted his flight goggles. The roar of aircraft engines filled the air, mingling with the scent of oil and dust. Today was his first official mission as a Tuskegee Airman, and his heart pounded in anticipation. David had always dreamed of flying. As a boy, he would watch birds soaring through the sky and imagine himself among them. His father, a World War I veteran, had once told him, "A man must fight for his right to rise." Those words stayed with him as he faced discrimination and doubt, even from fellow Americans who refused to believe that a black man could be a great pilot. At Tuskegee Army Airfield, David had trained tirelessly alongside his fellow airmen, men like Charles "Red" Hawkins, who could outmaneuver any pilot in a dogfight, and James "Slim" Daniels, whose calm voice over the radio gave them confidence even in the most dangerous moments. They had all come from different parts of the country, but they shared one goal: proving their worth in the skies. As he climbed into the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang, its red tail gleaming in the sunlight, David took a deep breath. Their mission was to escort a squadron of American bombers over enemy territory in Europe. The white pilots they were protecting had once doubted their skills. Today, David and his fellow Tuskegee Airmen would show them why they were called the Red Tails. Over the radio, the mission commander's voice crackled, "Red Tails, let's bring our boys home safe." The squadron took off, the powerful engines lifting them into the endless blue. As they approached enemy lines, the silence was shattered by the whistling streaks of enemy fire. German fighter planes swooped in from the clouds, their machine guns blazing. David gripped the controls and maneuvered into position. "Slim, on my left," he called, diving to protect a bomber under attack. His bullets found their target, sending an enemy plane spiraling down in smoke. For hours, the Tuskegee Airmen fought fiercely, shielding the bombers and proving their courage. When the mission ended, not a single bomber had been lost under their watch. As they landed back at base, the one skeptical white pilot stood waiting. One of them, a young lieutenant, removed his helmet and extended a hand to David. "I never thought I'd say this, but you saved our lives up there. I owe you one." David shook his hand, knowing that today, history had been changed. The sky no longer belonged to just one race, it belonged to those with the skill, the heart, and the courage to claim it. And the Tuskegee Airmen had done just that. Wings of Courage, a Tuskegee Airman story. Episode 2. The Price of Valor. Italy, 1944. The cold wind howled over the airfield as Captain David Carter adjusted his leather flight jacket. The war had changed him. He was no longer the young pilot proving himself in the skies, he was now a leader. The Red Tails had become legendary, escorting bombers deep into enemy territory without losing a single one. But today's mission was different. Today, they would fly farther than ever before, straight into the heart of Nazi Germany. David gathered his men inside a dimly lit briefing room. A large map covered the wall, red lines marking their flight path. "Listen up, men," he said, his voice steady. "We'll be escorting B-17 bombers over Berlin. The Luftwaffe will throw everything they've got at us, but we've faced worse, and we've won. Stay tight, protect the bombers, and watch each other's backs." Among the group was Lieutenant Tommy "Ace" Jefferson, one of the squadron's finest marksmen, and Second Lieutenant William "Billy" Porter, the youngest pilot in the unit. Billy's hands trembled slightly, and David placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You'll be fine, kid. Just remember your training." As dawn broke, the Red Tails took to the skies. Their P-51 Mustangs sliced through the cold air, their signature red tails gleaming against the gray clouds. They met the B-17 bombers over the sea, flying in perfect formation. Then, the attack came. German Messerschmitt fighters swarmed in like hornets, their machine guns lighting up the sky. David spotted a bomber taking heavy fire. "Cover that bomber. Ace, on me." Ace veered to the left and fired, hitting a German plane. The enemy fighter spiraled down in flames, but more came. The sky was chaos: bullets, explosions, smoke. David saw Billy being chased by two enemy planes. "Billy, brake left," David shouted. But Billy hesitated for a second too long. A German fighter fired, and Billy's plane burst into flames. David watched in horror as it spiraled downward. No. He knew there was nothing he could do. The mission had to continue. The Red Tails fought fiercely, shooting down enemy planes, and keeping the bombers safe. By the time they turned back toward base, the air was thick with smoke and fire. When they landed, silence filled the air. One of their own was gone. David took off his helmet, gripping it tightly. "We lost a good man today," he said quietly. "But Billy died a hero. He fought so that others could live." Ace, usually full of jokes, wiped his eyes. "We keep flying, Cap. For Billy, for all of us." David nodded. The war wasn't over, but the Red Tails would keep fighting. Not just for their country, but for their right to fly, to serve, and to prove that they belonged in the sky. As the sun set over the airfield, David looked up at the sky Billy had dreamed of soaring through. The fight was far from over, but the Red Tails would never back down. Wings of Courage, a Tuskegee Airmen story. Episode 3. The Test of Brotherhood. Southern Italy, winter 1944. The air was thick with the scent of oil, and metal as Captain David Carter stood outside his aircraft, staring at the charred remains of Billy's empty bunk inside their barracks. It had been 2 weeks since the young pilot had gone down, but the pain still lingered like a wound that refused to heal. He should still be here, David muttered under his breath. A sat nearby, tightening a bolt on his P-51 Mustang. We all knew the risks, Cap, he said softly, but Billy wouldn't want us moping around. He'd want us to keep flying. David nodded, but something inside him felt different. He had flown countless missions, risked his lifetime, and time again, but now the weight of leadership felt heavier. Every young pilot who joined the Red Tails looked up to him, and if they died under his command, was it his fault? Before he could dwell on it further, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Captain Carter, you're needed in the briefing room immediately. David snapped out of his trance, and rushed inside, where Colonel Benjamin O'Neill, their commanding officer, stood beside a large map. Gentlemen, listen up. The Germans have a hidden airfield just outside the Po Valley, deep in enemy territory. We need to take it out before they can launch an assault on our bombers. But here's the catch: this isn't just another escort mission. You're going in first. Murmurs filled the room. The Red Tails had never been tasked with leading an air raid before. Ace smirked. So they finally trust us to do more than just guard duty, huh? O'Neill's face was serious. They don't just trust you, Lieutenant. They're counting on you. If we fail, hundreds of bombers and their crews could be lost. David took a deep breath. Then we don't fail. The mission the next morning, the Red Tails soared into the frozen sky, their red-tailed Mustangs cutting through the clouds like blades of fire. David led the formation, scanning the terrain below. The German airfield was well hidden between the hills, but as they approached, anti-aircraft fire erupted from the ground. Flashes of orange and black smoke burst all around them. Stay tight. We break on my signal. David barked into his radio. Ace's voice came through the static. I count at least a dozen enemy planes on the ground, but they're scrambling to take off. David clenched his jaw. They had to strike fast. Red Tails, break formation, and hit those planes before they can get airborne. Ace and the others dived down, unleashing a storm of machine gun fire. Explosions erupted across the airfield as fuel tanks ignited, sending German aircraft into flames before they could leave the ground. But the enemy wasn't unprepared. Anti-aircraft guns rotated and locked onto them. A shell exploded near David's wing, sending his Mustang spinning. I'm hit, he yelled, fighting the controls. Ace's voice crackled in. Hang on, Cap. I got your tail. David steadied his plane just in time to see 3 enemy Messerschmitt fighters diving toward him. Ace swooped in, taking out one of them, but the other 2 were closing fast. David knew he had one chance. He yanked his stick hard to the left, pulling into a tight barrel roll. The first enemy fighter overshot him, exposing its belly the perfect target. David fired. The Messerschmitt burst into flames and plummeted. The second enemy pilot was skilled though. He looped around and got behind David, his guns blazing. Just as David thought he was done for, another Red Tail Mustang swooped in from nowhere and took the shot. It was Lieutenant William Slim Daniels. David grinned. Nice timing, Slim. Slim chuckled over the radio. Couldn't let you have all the fun, Cap. With most of the German planes destroyed, the Red Tails pulled back and watched the airfield go up in flames. They had done it. As they flew home, David looked around at his squadron, his brothers. He had lost one, but he wouldn't lose another. The Red Tails were more than just pilots. They were a family, and families never quit. Wings of Courage, a Tuskegee Airmen story. Episode 4. The Shadow of Doubt. Southern Italy, January, 1945. The mess hall was unusually quiet that evening. The Red Tails had returned victorious from their last mission, destroying a key German airfield, but no one was celebrating. The war wasn't over yet, and a new challenge loomed on the horizon. Captain David Carter sat at a table, absent-mindedly stirring his coffee. Across from him, Lieutenant Tommy Ace Jefferson leaned back in his chair. You know what I heard today, Cap? Ace said, keeping his voice low. Word is, some of the white bomber crews still don't trust us to cover them. David sighed. He had heard the rumors too. Despite their flawless escort record, some bomber pilots still doubted the Tuskegee Airmen simply because of the color of their skin. Before David could respond, the door burst open. A young communications officer rushed in, breathless. Captain Carter, Colonel O'Neill needs to see you right away. David shot Ace a look. Guess it's never a quiet night, huh? The briefing. In the war room, Colonel O'Neill stood by a map of Germany, his expression grim. "Gentlemen, tomorrow's mission will be the most dangerous one yet." David and the other officers leaned in. "You'll be escorting bombers to Berlin," O'Neill continued. "The Germans have strengthened their defenses. Expect heavy resistance from enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire." David nodded. "We can handle it, sir." O'Neill hesitated before speaking again. The bomber squadron requested a different escort team. They don't believe the Red Tails can get the job done. David's jaw tightened. Even after all they had accomplished, some still refused to see them as equals. Ace, standing beside him, scoffed. "What a surprise." O'Neill's voice hardened. "I refuse their request. They don't get to choose their escort. You men have never lost a bomber, and I expect you to keep it that way." David straightened his shoulders. "We won't let them down, sir." The mission the next morning, the Red Tails lined up on the runway, their red-nosed P-51 Mustangs gleaming under the winter sun. As David climbed into his cockpit, he glanced over at the massive B-17 bombers rolling down the airstrip. He could almost feel their crew's skepticism. "They don't trust us. Fine. We'll prove them wrong again. Red Tails, ready for takeoff." David called over the radio. The engines roared to life, and within minutes, they were soaring toward Berlin. The battle over Berlin. As they neared the target, David's radio crackled. Enemy fighters approaching. Multiple bogies. High and fast. A wave of German Messerschmitts descended upon them. The sky erupted in gunfire as tracer rounds zipped through the air. David pulled hard on the stick, his plane rolling into an evasive maneuver, just as bullets whizzed past. "Ace, take the left flank. Slim, cover the bombers." Ace whooped over the radio. "On it, Cap." David locked onto an enemy plane, fired, and watched as it burst into flames and spiraled downward. Meanwhile, two enemy fighters broke past their line and dived toward the bombers. If they reached them, the mission could be a disaster. David's heart pounded. Not today. He pushed his throttle forward, cutting through the chaos. Lining up his shot, he squeezed the trigger, his bullets ripping through the enemy plane's fuselage. The bomber crews watched as the Red Tails defended them with unmatched precision. By the time the smoke cleared, the enemy fighters had been driven back. The bombers were untouched. David's radio crackled again, this time with an unfamiliar voice. "This is Eagle 1. Damn fine flying. Red Tails, damn fine." For the first time, there was no doubt, only respect, victory, and vindication. Back at the airbase, as David climbed out of his plane, a white bomber pilot approached him. The man hesitated, then extended his hand. "I was wrong about you guys," he admitted. "I've never felt safer in the sky than I did today." David shook his hand, a small smile playing at his lips. "We were just doing our job, Captain." The Red Tails had done more than just escort bombers that day. They had shattered doubt, one mission at a time. But the war wasn't over yet, and the fight for respect was far from finished. Wings of Courage, a Tuskegee Airmen story. Episode 5. A Dangerous Rescue. February 1945, somewhere over the Alps. The Tuskegee Airmen had just returned from their successful Berlin mission. But there was no time for rest. The war was at its peak, and the Red Tails were needed more than ever. Captain David Carter sat in the briefing room, rubbing the exhaustion from his eyes. He hadn't slept properly in days. Colonel O'Neill entered, holding a telegram in his hand. "Listen up, men. One of our own is missing." David's stomach dropped. "Who?" "Lieutenant William Slim Daniels? His plane was hit during yesterday's mission. He crash-landed somewhere in enemy territory? The Germans have likely captured him." The room fell silent. Slim was more than a fellow pilot, he was family. Ace stood up immediately. "We're going after him?" O'Neill shook his head. "It's not that simple. The area is crawling with German patrols. We have no idea if he's even alive." David's jaw tightened. "Then we find out." The colonel sighed. "We can't officially send in a rescue team, but..." He looked directly at David. "If a few of you decide to go off course during your next patrol, I won't stop you." David exchanged a look with Ace. They understood the message loud and clear. They were going behind enemy lines. That night David, Ace, and two other pilots, Jackson and Rivers, volunteered for a routine patrol. At least, that's what they reported. Once they were airborne, David broke radio silence. "Red Tails, we're heading east. Let's bring our brother home." After an hour of flying low over the Alps, they spotted something, a wrecked P-51 Mustang lying in the snow. It was Slim's plane. Ace whistled. "Looks bad, but he's gotta be close." David scanned the landscape. There, movement near the tree line. A small figure was limping through the snow, waving a piece of fabric. It was Slim. But before they could celebrate, the radio crackled. "Incoming enemy aircraft? 4 o'clock. German fighters were closing in fast." "The dogfight?" David made a split-second decision. "Ace, cover me. I'm getting Slim." While the others engaged the enemy, David swooped down low. Slim was waving frantically, his face exhausted but determined. David spoke into his radio. "Slim, can you hear me?" A weak but relieved voice came through. "Loud and clear, Cap. Took you long enough. You still got fight in you?" David asked. "Always." David couldn't land without being an easy target. But Slim had trained for this. The plan was dangerous: jump onto the wing, and hold on for dear life. As David's plane skimmed the snow, Slim ran forward, leaped, and grabbed onto the wing strut. "Hold tight," David yelled, pulling up fast. Meanwhile, Ace was in the thick of battle. He shot down one Messerschmitt, but the others kept coming. Jackson's voice rang over the radio. "I got another one." Rivers, however, wasn't so lucky. A burst of gunfire hit his tail, sending his plane into a spin. David clenched his teeth. "Rivers, bail out. Now." A parachute opened just before his plane crashed into the valley below. Ace growled, "We'll come back for him, but we need to get out of here first." With Slim holding on for dear life, David turned his plane sharply, dodging enemy fire. Ace and Jackson provided cover, taking down the last of the enemy fighters. "We're clear. Heading home." Back at base, when they landed, Slim collapsed onto the ground, laughing breathlessly. "I knew you fools wouldn't leave me behind." David patted his shoulder. "Never." Ace grinned. "But next time, try not to get shot down, huh?" Despite their victory, David's mind was already elsewhere. Rivers was still out there, and they weren't leaving him behind either. The war wasn't over, and neither was their fight. Wings of Courage, a Tuskegee Airmen story. Episode 6. Mission to Save Rivers. February 1945, enemy territory, Austria. Lieutenant Charlie Rivers Parker had been floating through the cold night sky for what felt like an eternity. His parachute swayed in the freezing wind, his breath visible in the moonlight. Below him, the dark silhouette of a dense forest stretched for miles. His plane was gone, shot down. His brothers were gone, forced to retreat. And now, he was alone behind enemy lines. As he neared the treetops, he braced for impact. Branches snapped, his parachute tangled, and then darkness. The search begins. Back at the airbase, Captain David Carter paced in the briefing room. They had brought Slim home, but now they had lost Rivers. Ace leaned against the table. "We can't just sit here, Cap." David nodded. "We go at first light?" Colonel O'Neill stood by the window, arms crossed. "I hope you boys know what you're doing." David turned to him. "With all due respect, sir, he's one of ours. We don't leave our own behind." O'Neill sighed. "Then you'd better move fast. The Germans won't let a captured airman live for long." David clenched his jaw. They had no time to waste. Behind enemy lines again. At dawn, David, Ace, and Slim flew their P-51 Mustangs low over the Austrian countryside, scanning for any sign of Rivers. There, Ace suddenly called out. "Smoke. Near the forest." David adjusted his goggles. Could be him. Could be Germans. Slim exhaled sharply. Only one way to find out. They followed the smoke trail to a small, half-destroyed farmhouse on the outskirts of a village. A single German jeep was parked outside. David's gut twisted. They were too late, until the barn door burst open. A lone figure sprinted out, ducking behind the trees. It was Rivers, and right behind him 2 German soldiers, rifles raised. "They found him!" Slim shouted. David didn't hesitate. He banked hard, swooping low. He fired a warning burst into the dirt near the soldiers. The Germans dove for cover as Rivers disappeared into the trees. Ace whooped over the radio. "Now that's what I call an entrance." But getting Rivers out was going to be the real challenge. The escape plan? David circled above while Ace and Slim took position. They had to get Rivers out before German reinforcements arrived. Over the radio, Rivers' voice crackled. "Fellas, I hope you got a plan, because I'm running out of places to hide." David smirked. "We always do." They spotted a clearing ahead, a dirt road just wide enough for a quick landing. "Slim, get down there. Grab him. We'll cover you." Slim didn't need to be told twice. He cut his speed and touched down in the open field. Rivers sprinted toward the plane. Bullets whizzed past him as more Germans emerged from the trees. Ace roared into action, gunning down enemy positions. "Not today, boys." Rivers leaped onto the wing, grabbing hold as Slim gunned the engine. The Mustang roared to life. They were airborne just as German trucks rumbled onto the road. David and Ace flanked Slim's plane, covering them until they were out of range. Rivers' breathless voice came through the radio. "Remind me to never get shot down again." David chuckled. "Welcome back, Rivers." Back at base, as the Mustangs touched down, the airfield erupted into cheers. Rivers climbed out, shaking his head. "Next time, you come get me a little faster, huh?" Ace grinned. "Next time, don't get shot down." Colonel O'Neill approached, arms crossed.